Hello, today I'm going to go over a really fun experiment that you can use with your students who are alternately assessed when you're addressing the Science Essential Element 5, PS 1 through 3, which is making observations and measure to identify materials based on their properties. So I found this really fun experiment. It's called a root beer float experiment. And I want to show you how I took the data recording sheet and how I differentiated it for all different needs. And how I went through and I chunked the information and I provided some scaffolding and support so that you can utilize this particular worksheet, this data recording sheet, for this experiment with students of various levels, right? So let's go through and I'll show you the different ways that I was able to chunk the information to make it easily accessible, right? If you wanted to take piece by piece with your students, if a whole worksheet would be a little too challenging. And I did this by taking screenshots and then embedding them into my Jamboard. And the reason why I often choose a Jamboard is because I can have students participate with me and they can engage on the same slide and I can see what it is that they're doing. So right here, I took that first part of our data collection sheet, right, and I had taken a screenshot when it was in a PDF, and then I just put the copy of the PDF right here with the image so that the students can start off with the first part, which is identifying whether or not root beer is a solid or a liquid, or if ice cream is a solid or a liquid. And you can see here, I embedded the Boardmaker icons for each of them. So if your students are, familiar with their AAC device and that's what they're utilizing to communicate with you, you can support them in that way. Or if you do have a verbal student that might need some support with that vocabulary, you can also utilize that, right? So I embedded the images that I made in Boardmaker right here, and I just put in solid and liquid. And I color coded them because what you can also do on your Jamboard is you can go in and you can choose a marker or pen or whatever, and you can highlight different parts to make sure that you are able to provide another visual cue for your students to get the correct answer. So we can start off right here with using blue, and then going down below when we have the highlighter and either underlining the root beer, you can put a box around it if that's better. And then you can say, okay, so the root beer, is that a solid or a liquid? And then your students, because they're able to also go into this Jamboard and touch things and move things around and write on here, they can either write in their answer, since the support is right here with the word, or they can drag and drop it. If it's easier for them to draw a line, they can absolutely do that as well, right? You can have them just draw a line to the actual icon, right? So definitely different options for your students to utilize if that works for them. But I wanted to show you that you can make this easily accessible by chunking the actual worksheet by taking a screenshot and then providing some visual supports and visual cues. So as we go along, we can also fade back some of those supports, right? So you can also, instead of having the whole icon boxed in a color, you can just put a border around it, right? And once again, your students will have the same options where they can decide if they want to draw a line to the particular answer, right? The ice cream is a solid, and then we can say that the root beer is a liquid, right? So they can draw a line if that works for them. They can write in the word. You can have them drag and drop, right? Whichever one your students are more accessible or able to do, go for it. The nice thing here too is you can just duplicate these slides by hitting these three little dots up here. It'll say duplicate or delete. You can duplicate every slide so you can make sure each of your students has a particular slide that they can access. So you can have your students write their names up here, and you'll see as you go through your students taking turns, and then everyone will be able to watch and kind of go through the work with them. So that's another really great feature of utilizing a Jamboard, again, is that accessibility back and forth between you and your students. So as we go through, again, I can fade all of my color coding if it's really that I want my students either to just drag the icon there if they don't need that color coding support. If I want them to write or type it in, they can do that, but I still provided a visual cue. I just faded back some of that visual supports, those cues of color coding, right? So I would leave this open as well. Okay, so some options. And again, if your students they know the vocabulary and they're able to write or type it in, you can maybe verbalize, okay, well, is root beer a liquid or a solid? Is ice cream a liquid or a solid? And they might be able to write in the answer, type in the answer, or maybe tell their paraprofessional what the answer is and have them write or type for them. Okay? So then moving through, I chunked out that other part of our worksheet, right? So when we had our original worksheet over here, we had like about 3 different parts to it. So we had whether or not they were solids, and then what we think is going to happen, right? So when you're going through a science experiment, the first part is you're going to predict what's going to happen. So let's go through and talk about what some of those predictions could be. And again, because there's no right or wrong answer here, I didn't color code it, but I still provided those icons for my students to have some support. So either if I want my students to be able to read the icon or if I want them to be able to drag and drop it into where we would have it written, they can do that. They can drag the icon and then they can write on or type on the sentence if I want. So I gave them some options with their icons down here. I still provided some support utilizing Boardmaker, but I didn't color code it because they can tell me whatever they want, right? We're predicting, there's no right or wrong, but when we go through our experiment, then we'll be able to go back and check, was our prediction correct, or do we need to change what it is that we were predicting, right? So again, this is much more supported. There's a few icons with minimal words. You can also go into Boardmaker and pull out full sentences, right? So here are some different options that I created in Boardmaker to kind of support my students in making predictions, but still allowing them the option to choose. I added an extra choice. So we have the ice cream will freeze, the root beer will freeze, or the ice cream will melt, right? So then go through, pick anything. Again, they can drag and drop it, and then they can write it below it if you want them to, or they can drag and drop it. The paraprofessional can support them, or they can write, they can type, whatever your students' levels are, you can definitely meet them there and have fun with this experiment. So again, that was some support a little higher level because we have full sentences. Or you can leave it wide open, right? They can put in anything they want. They can draw a picture of what they think will happen. They could write a few words, they could type a few words and add a picture. So you have a bunch of different options with this Jamboard. You can, utilize it however you want. You can support as much as you want, and you can fade back some of those supports. So then as we go through, I also next, for our next step, when we're actually going through our experiment, I embedded a Boardmaker list of all the directions. So I have our 3 steps, what we're going to do, and I can review that with my students so that when I get all my materials ready to show them, I can have them go through and be able to read an adapted direction, and we can go through and practice our measurements. We can go step by step. We can then check if our predictions are accurate or not. So now that you went through each of the steps with your students, you talked about your predictions, you went through the different steps of the experiment, I then printed out all the steps and I'm going to go through and do the experiment with my students. They can participate if they want to, if their parents are able to get them the materials and agree to that. But if not, you can still go through it and show your students each of the steps. So I have all of my materials here. I have my half cup measuring cup. I have my root beer, and I have my ice cream, right? I have a little scooper, and I also have a cup, okay? So let's go through the first step. You can have your students read it on the screen while your paras are supporting them, and then you can go through and do each of the steps that they say. So step 1 is pour a half a cup of root beer into the cup. So I have my root beer here. I'm going to pour it in my measuring cup, which is a half a cup. And then I'm going to pour that into my cup. There we go. Next, it says put 2 small scoops of ice cream into the cup. So I have my ice cream, have my scooper. 1, oop, there it goes, and 2. Last, it says pour another half cup. Here's my measuring cup, here's my root beer. Pour it on in, and then add it to the cup. Now everyone take a look, because now we can see what's happening. And so I chose a see-through cup. I know it's red, it's not too hard to see, but you can start to see here that the foam is happening and there's no longer any ice cream. So again, even though you're not there in person with your students and they might not be able to do this activity, you can still model it and show them. So I hope this is fun for you to do with your students. It's pretty simple, and I hope it's a fun way to go through different states of matter and have a science experiment virtually in their home.